It's finally time for the Bigwig crew to take a deep dive into one of the most legendary JRPGs of all time, Chrono Trigger. It will be our fifth 1995 Game of Some Other Year nominee, and will it take out the top prize? Swinny, take it away. We're finally doing it.
Finally getting to Chrono Trigger. It's only been about 2 months or something in that regard. It's been a while anyway. I think, what was the last game we talked about? I think it was Yoshi's Island. So just think about
Really?
when we
Was it
talked
Yoshi's
about that.
Island?
It was Yoshi's Island.
Shit, that was so long ago.
Yeah, so look, Chrono Trigger is a game for many people that doesn't need introduction, but I know that it's also a pretty old game and a lot of people probably just know it by name alone. So I just wanted to give a bit of context. This Chrono Trigger, it came out on the SNES in 1995, as we said, but it's almost like the first supergroup game that I can remember where they made a point to say, okay, we're getting all these people, well-known people from, these big titles and everything across different developers, and they're going to be working on this thing together. So they're what Square dubbed the Dream Team. So we had Hironobu Sakaguchi, basically the creator and father of Final Fantasy. We had Yuji Horii, who last week we said he won Lifetime Achievement Award at GDC, the creator of Enix's Dragon Quest series. And this was prior to Square Enix merging as well. We had Akira Toriyama, Dragon Ball, and also the character designer of all the Dragon Quest games. And we also had, while Yasunori Mitsuda composed the majority of the game, he actually fell ill during development, and we had Nobuo Uematsu come in to wrap up the soundtrack. So you could even consider him because he's obviously the Final Fantasy composer as well. So this big dream team.
What an amazing replacement.
Yeah.
Gotta rope someone in.
And this massive dream team coming together across Square and Enix, as well as Akira Toriyama. Like, I have no idea, but it wouldn't surprise me if this project was one of the big reasons why they ended up merging as well, because they basically, they worked together on these kind of projects. Because back then, a lot of people considered Square and Enix as competitors. So,
But they were, totally, yeah.
and I'll also clarify something that I completely forgotten about, because you hear Square and you hear Squaresoft. Squaresoft was like the American brand name, so Square was the Japanese. So yeah, it's Chrono Trigger. It's one of the most well-regarded SNES games.
And I think that's why, it was an amazing framing that you just did then. And I think that's why also it set a high expectation of, okay, we're pulling all these amazing people together, the marketing of the game. These launches in Japan were massive. They're still massive, but they were even bigger back then. Like, you literally had to change the date that they're releasing some of these games because, the Dragon Quest games were causing kids not to go to school and people not to go to work, right?
Yeah,
but
this was actually the second best-selling game of that year in Japan, only beaten by Dragon Quest V.
And I guess, it's a really good framing for you because, to me, and, we'll go in how much we like it and final thoughts and what we didn't like, but it did live up to, the expectations of what a game like this could do and how it looks and the sound and the story and the optional endings and all this other kind of stuff. And I think that's why, people regard this game as the greatest game of all time. I think that kind of that context and that psychology of people entering this game, they're like, hey, we're putting the bar really high. And then they're actually gone over the top of it. Then people are like, wow, you got to give them credit. So yeah, it was really, really good context setting there, Swinny.
A fun tidbit as well. So people may have heard the name Ted Woolsey. So he was responsible for all the translations for a lot of the Square games back then. He had 1 month to translate Chrono Trigger.
Oh my God, dude, that's horrible.
1 month.
And it's not just as simple as, I don't understand Japanese, but there's a lot of cultural references in gaming, especially Japanese games. And, people go crazy on, oh, this is mistranslated because it really means this in this culture and all this other kind of crap. So, but yeah, do you want to start off on things that we like, Swinny?
Yeah, look, there's a lot to talk about here for me. I'll just frame this that I've never been the biggest fan of Chrono Trigger. I always respected it and appreciated it for what it is. But I first played this, actually the only time I played this, I think I did a partial second playthrough, but it was all back in the 90s, the late 90s when I played this. And I played it via emulation. this game never came out in Australia.
Yeah, how crazy is that, right?
And I think the reason why at the time that it didn't floor me was some of those reasons still hold up now, but I'm so glad I replayed this game because I really appreciate it so much more. Like at the time when the only, I guess, JRPGs I'd played before I played Chrono Trigger was, I think, like your Final Fantasy VI, Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore, maybe Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is, not a great game. But like, think about that. Then playing Chrono Trigger, I really didn't have much of a context of where that genre had gotten to and what this game actually did for it. But in terms of, I look specific things, this game from a technical standpoint is just absolutely gorgeous, and it might not be the game that's pushing the SNES to its absolute limits, but it felt like that for me when I was playing it, like especially visually. This is just such a gorgeous, pretty game, and like just even like how like on the screen at the moment on YouTube we've got the overworld there, like just the way they approach that stuff, it's just visually just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And there's so many, everything's extra, like the battle effects and everything, just still, everything's got so much to it, so much oomph to it. Even, for instance, like I think it's in the Ocean Palace level where you just have to cross a bridge, and they actually they take you down a little elevator just to lower down, and then you go back another elevator just to give the room a sense of depth. Normally, another RPG would just have you walk up.
Yeah.
It's things like that they just went the extra mile.
And the B-roll here is a really good example. It's tilted in an isometric, maybe 30 degrees. The world, as opposed to the typical not top down, but sort of, I don't even know what angle you could describe it as in most standard RPGs. Whereas it's really cool. They sort of tilted certain scenes that way. And there's even certain scenes that are tilted so it's almost side on.
Yeah.
Some of the castle bits where you got to climb through the walls and stuff. And I don't know a hell of a lot about the technicality of the SNES, but having seen a few videos about how games were produced for the system and how the tiling system worked and the way it was able to render things, this would actually have been really pushing how the SNES did some of that stuff. So it's quite. It would have been technologically advanced at the time, I'd imagine, for a system like the SNES as well. It may not seem like it, but I think it really was.
Well, even in battles, because battles are turn-based, but they take place in the field now, where the enemies are on screen with you, like you're in the level. Even that presented challenges, because if you think to the Final Fantasy games, which a lot of the people worked on this game were coming from those games, those are static sprites that you're taken away to another field. They actually had to do all animations for all the enemies during battles. There was so much that went into this.
Yeah, and I don't want to move off. Well, like I want to loop back to that release point, like us playing it in Australia, because it's quite crazy to think about. Because people might, especially in Europe and US, like okay, yeah, you didn't get it on the SNES, but you got it on PlayStation when they re-released it on PlayStation. It's like, no, we didn't get it then either. Like literally in Europe and Australia, legitimately the first time you could have played this game was 2009 when it got released on the DS, which is just freaking crazy. Probably for a lot of people the best way to play the game, the DS version. I still prefer the SNES version, even though it's got some issues with it. But yeah, like going to the presentation, it's not my superstar. Like it's not like what I love. Like I much prefer the Final Fantasy VI style. But it's one of those games where you look at it and you go, it's amazingly executed. Like throughout all the worlds, the levels, it's so distinct. The different, I guess in modern language you call it like biomes, right? But like the different worlds are so distinct from each other. Like you like even getting into the time traveling mechanic, like you do straight away know which era you're in, which isn't like sounds really easy, but it's actually so well executed that it doesn't matter where you are, You're like, okay, I know where I'm at now, or I'm, 65 million years ago, or whatever it is, and all this other kind of stuff. It's like, okay, like it's really, really clear. So
Well, largely, there were a couple of instances where I wasn't quite sure exactly where I was in a certain timeline.
oh, okay, interesting.
Like the six,
I
I
never
don't know
had
if it was
that.
the 600 or the one. No,
There's
it wasn't that
there's
part.
two
There were a
timelines that are
few-
pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
maybe it was that
that's-
one.
yeah.
The other ones are pretty distinctive.
Yeah,
Really, really
yeah.
distinctive, especially because you're talking about millions of
So
years between some of
we
them,
should check, like, have we all beaten the game? We didn't
I-
even check in at the start.
I haven't. I got pretty far into it.
Where did you get up
I
to?
looked it up, and I reckon maybe 80% of the way through. Because
80%.
I quite, to go on a very quick tangent, I quite like the game. I never played it originally. And by originally, I mean like you guys. I never played it back in the 90s or the early 2000s, when it maybe was, I wouldn't say more relevant, because these kind of games continue to exist. When you look at RPG Maker games, you look at all the Kemco stuff that you keep reviewing, Swinny. It's not like the genre died or anything like that. But there would have been improvements since then. There would have been things that have happened in the industry, plus a shit ton of games that I've played ever since. So it's really hard to, like with all the other games we played, to put myself in the shoes of someone who played this back then. And back then it would have been amazing. But even now, I really enjoyed playing this. I mostly played it on my my little
Don't
device.
start talking about it. Unless we get sponsored from it.
My little DS, and yeah, I absolutely love what I played of the game. It did sort of get towards the end, though, where I'll admit, at maybe like the 60-70% mark, it got a little bit of it became a little bit of a chore, and especially because the story admittedly didn't really drive me that much. I didn't get captivated by the story all that much at all, to be honest, while playing the game. But we'll talk about that in more detail.
Yeah, I want to come back to that specific thing when we covered stuff we like, because I have stuff to talk about with that.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Do you want to come in the frame?
Yeah. What are you doing?
Sorry.
What is this? What's my guy? It's like I was like, what is that frying pan sound? And then he's literally got like a frying pan. Okay, so
All right, to answer
Sorry.
your,
so
to answer your,
hang on. For people who are not watching the video, so I was hearing a frying sound. I'm like, is that like Mike's house? Like there's a shower going on or something, right?
Oh, sorry.
And then I actually literally see a frying pan come into frame. He's got like a sausage or something that's hand delivered.
No, it's not a sausage. I'm vegetarian. It's
You're a vegetarian now? Since when?
I've been a vegetarian for a while.
How long? I didn't know that.
Anyway, this
How
is a
long?
huge
Just say how
tangent.
long.
I don't know, a year and a bit.
No way,
year and a
really?
half, I don't know.
Holy
I
shit.
thought I told you before,
No,
because
definitely not.
certain
Definitely
partner
not.
of yours
Yeah.
hangs the same way. So.
Yeah, my whole family's
I thought I
vegetarian
told you
apart from
about
me. Wow. Okay, interesting.
Anyway,
Take
sorry
it
about
over.
the tangent. I didn't expect that.
yeah. So to answer your question, so I did beat this game again. I actually didn't know if I was going to beat the whole thing. I definitely wanted a refresher. I didn't realize how much I didn't remember about this game, so I'm very happy that I did play through it all.
Yeah. So I beat it, but I didn't get one of the great endings. And then I was looking at how to do that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think I'm done. Right? I'm like, I'm okay. I'm satisfied. So, and what else did you want to touch on in the things that we liked, Swinny?
Look, you can't talk about Chrono Trigger without talking about probably most famous part of the game.
Go on.
Which is
Its soundtrack.
yes.
Chrono Trigger has one of the most legendary soundtracks, and we mentioned before the fact that Mitsuda actually fell ill, but he was responsible for the vast majority of the tracks in this game. And oh my god, these tracks! Like it's definitely in my top 10 game soundtracks. I wouldn't argue
Whoa.
if anyone's got it in their top 5 or top 3
All time.
because
Dang.
it is probably one of them. Like I could sit there listening to each track, and I'm like, yes, each track is almost a banger. Except there's a couple. Like I'm not a big fan of Frog's theme, for instance, but like just the overall themes, I think it's the Charlotte's theme, Corridors of Time. These are just all-time legendary SNES music tracks. And the big thing for me though is it actually elevates the entire game. The soundtrack, soundtrack is normally it's great, but the rest of the game is good as well. To me, it just the mood of the game is the soundtrack's so important to that. And if it wasn't as good, then I it definitely wouldn't be the same game for me. So
You know what? Like the one thing for me is, and this is all subjective. I think the tracks, and you're 100% right. Like so many of the tracks, you listen through them and like, damn man, this is just like killer tracks. Like it's awesome, kind of almost ambient music. Some of the music as well. Like you can just put it on if you're working and stuff. I really didn't like the battle music in the game, and it really
fair enough.
kind of like pissed me. Like it was just it's too much, and it's like one thing about battle music, it's super hard to do it well, like in a
Yeah.
JRPG. And like I can think through a lot of other JRPGs. I'm like, I doesn't bother me at all. It's almost like that's fine. You want to get the sense of like, okay, the pace is picked up, all that kind of stuff. But there's something about it that's a bit grating, and it honestly kind of like put a bit of a pall over the whole soundtrack for me because it just when I put it in my head, that's the thing I remember, the battle music straight away. But then if I start thinking about the other songs, I'm like, yeah, they're awesome. Like it is. You're right. It's definitely one of the best soundtracks. If that's the best thing about the game, for me, can we talk about the
I'd say
time traveling stuff? Yeah.
No, I was
Or-
just going to say it's like
I was going to talk about the battle system you just mentioned.
no. I was just say it's if a lot of people say about Chrono Trigger, the soundtrack's often the thing that comes.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
And Mike, you want to talk about the battle
Yeah, I was
system?
going to talk about the actual battle system because you just mentioned it. It's I haven't played as many, nowhere near as many RPGs as you, Swinny. So you can correct me if I'm
Well,
wrong.
I don't
but
think there's many people that have, so that's a pretty moot statement. But yeah, go on.
that's true. That's very true. So two really cool distinctive things about the battle system that they have, because it obviously uses elements from other types of games with the bars that fill in depending on the time, and you can change between wait and active mode as well. But
Yeah, what
is
did
really
we all
cool-
play it at? Like I played it as active. I never
wait.
changed it. Oh, you
I think I
changed
had
it. You
wait
cheat.
on.
I know. I always play
I
as
don't know.
Wait.
Oh,
I
you-
just
you
prefer the
filthy
wait
animal.
from the
I-
Final
I-
Fantasy
It's so much
days.
easier playing as weight.
No, I don't. I'm not actually a big fan of ATV. So I
Neither
prefer,
am I.
So I prefer Wait because it puts it closer to a standard turn base. That's why. I was
Yeah, same.
People would like literally online go, "I'll make the game easier by putting on weight." I'm like,
okay.
I
I didn't really-
refuse.
It's
I mean,
an
the game
option.
was-
It's
I
an option in
refuse.
the game.
The game.
Yeah, it's always easy mode.
Speaking of difficulty, I did find the game was pretty easy. It was weird
Yeah,
compared
wait.
to just any of those games. It was way easier. I don't know if I've ever really died in that. Oh no, I died against the dude that trains you magic. I forget his name. In the
Yeah,
end
the
of-
trainer in
end
the
of
end.
time.
yeah,
of
the
time.
trainer. He's killed me. But other than that, it's like you almost can't die in that game. Anyway, back to the
No,
battle
if you're
system
playing
itself.
as weight versus active, it makes a huge difference. But yeah, go on.
Probably a huge difference, yeah. But in the so two awesome things. Number one is the fact that the actual enemies are in the world. They're visible. You know you're going to run into an enemy because the enemy is right there in front of you. It's not like Final Fantasy where you're just walking around and all of a sudden, you get attacked by an invisible freaking whatever that's not on the map. It's not in front of you. It just randomly attacks you. I like that. I like the idea that the enemies you bump into are actually there and you bump into them as opposed to just randomly generated per se. The other thing that I thought was really cool and different to a lot of those types of games that I played is the synergy between the characters. And the fact that it encouraged you to play with a different character just to see what synergies they have in terms of the abilities to play with two different characters. And I experimented a bit with that, which I thought was really, really cool. And I don't know. I mean, I know other games have that to some extent in the sense that you use one character to debuff an enemy, let's say, and then you use another character to do something. But to actually see unique things happen when you combine two characters, I don't remember that many games doing that. I mean, Swinny, over to you. Whether that many other games that did a similar concept as that?
Oh, look, there's definitely JRPGs that do it, but in terms of like your big name Square style games, no, it's not that common. This is definitely one of the most notable and earlier games that had those like cross techs. They're called the skills techs in this game.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel really unique. Like at its core, to me, it's a fun take on the ATB style system, but it's a nice, simple system that I think has enough depth to it that it doesn't get too boring. But that combining text, as you said, it makes every party makeup feel really different because it completely changes what options you have. It's not like, oh, well, everyone can do an attack, everyone can do a heal. It's like, well, two of these characters together are going to be able to do a big attack, and I'm going to have that other person on healing, and things like that. So I you mentioned difficulty. This has to me one of the best difficulty curves in a classic RPG where it's challenging enough. And look, if you don't know the strategies for some of the bosses, you can die on them a couple of times.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it is considered one of the easier classic RPGs, but that's not a bad thing. Like some of those were really punishing. I think was a really great example of how to actually do that difficulty in one of those games.
And this is in particular a very almost Japanese thing where, they wanted X amount of hours out of these games, like 50 hours, 60 hours, 40 hours, something like that. And putting grinding in the games, it was like the way that they almost achieved that. Where like there's so many JRPGs where it's just like if you go through the game, do everything, do all the sort of side things as well, you just can't get through it. Like it's near impossible. Like you have to grind some levels at a minimum.
I find this one required that much.
I'd say older. No, I'll just say older games. Yes, it's much better these days.
Oh no, not modern.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I should be clear. I'm talking about 90s RPGs.
Yeah.
So this was very out of step from that. And definitely the weight versus active makes a huge difference because I switched like just to try it and I'm like, this is significantly easier with turn, like, forcing the turn because there were so many bosses that it was like, they're hitting me midway through and I know that they wouldn't be able to, right? So from a strategy point of view, there's things you can do to almost prevent them from hitting you, like even like through that. But
I feel like there were some bosses that were hitting me even though I was just waiting. It was in wait mode, but I was still getting hit by multiple attacks.
It's probably because there was a bit of a wind up when they activated it, so it actually still comes through. But the funny thing to me is, so I actually played through the vast majority of this game with two of my characters on Berserk the entire time. Where they were just literally attacking and I couldn't control. So I only was controlling one character. And I actually thought it actually ended up being a really cool way. But then I got stuck in one of the first major boss battles against a major villain, where it's like you have to do certain elemental things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna try to get through this with these two bastards on the Berserk. And it was a struggle, but I got there. It was. That strategy did not work in the late game, but it was really fun for most of the game.
Dude, that's exactly like me with Elden Ring, when I'm like, I'm going to use this first weapon that I get in the game from a boss, was like a mini boss, and I refuse to change, even though like late in the game, it's a shit weapon to use. Now I've realized looking at the stats and stuff like that. Talking about the elemental stuff, I also like that as well in terms of, because that was another layer with the battle system where it really was disadvantageous to have two party members of the same element, because like certain fights it just didn't make sense to do that, because it's also like some of the bosses and enemies would flip elements and stuff like that. So it actually made you consider, it's like, okay, even if I want that character, maybe I should pick another. And then some of the characters, like unless I fucked up the game, didn't have elemental magic. So it was kind of cool. Like, it kind of made you go, well, if I want elemental magic, I probably can't pick that character, but I like that character. It just like created like a nice trade-off is what any game system that excels does. So yeah, from my perspective, I can't fault the battle system. Like it was really, really cool.
Look, I guess you're about to mention the time travel stuff.
Yeah.
So, look, the way this game is all about time travel, surprise, surprise, but the way that it works in the mechanics and the design of the game is really, really cool. Like, think back to, at this time, games may take some risks, but especially for a big RPG developer and publisher, to say, we're going to have a game that's all about moving between these time zones, having quests that impact other time zones, and you have to move back and forth. Like, there's some quests we have to move between, like, 4 different time zones, and it's pretty, like, some of the steps are pretty crazy. And I was reading that it was a bit of a nightmare to bug test as well. But just for instance, like, here's an example. It's not really spoiler, but you've got a robot companion, right? You can leave him back in a previous time zone to help plant trees, and then come back thousands of years later. And there's a shrine dedicated to him for being like, for saving the earth and stuff. And that's just so cool. Like, you didn't see that in these games back then.
Yeah. And I don't want to there's time travel, there's multiple endings. I don't want to spoil like how many endings there are, but that to me, like that's the most distinct thing of Chrono Trigger. I remember like growing up, and then more in Australia it was like people started playing it through emulation in the late '90s, early 2000s, and they're like, "Oh, this game's crazy! It's like, go check it out. It's got like so many endings and stuff like that." And this was before like there's game FAQs, stuff like that, but it's still kind of an era where it's not like now, where like Elden Ring comes out and then like 1 week later, everyone's like, this is all the endings, this is all the major secrets. And there's kind of cool things about that, but there's also cool things where it was a bit more mysterious. And that was always the most distinct thing for me, Swinny. Like with this game, more than the soundtrack, it was just like, how did they fit so many endings, so many branching paths, so much like engineering into something that's like 4 MB or like 4 MB. I think it's crazy when you think of it that way.
And this is the like maybe they had one, but like this had a new game plus. Like Square didn't do that previously. And just like for instance, there's a chapter you get to. It's just called the Faded Hour. So but basically that's when a lot of the side content opens up to do with your party members and. That stuff, I didn't do all that stuff when I originally played the game, and when I did that all this time, so I did pretty much everything I could, and that was probably my favorite content in the game, and I think that's, gets into, when we talk about stuff we didn't like, it kind of, I think that's why I felt a part was missing when I previously played it, because that's actually where you learn a lot about these characters' backstories, and almost like their character arcs resolve, so, and that a lot of that involves moving between those time periods, so that's where that really shines for me. So,
and I kind of love that about this game. There's so much shit there. It's like, I know I keep on talking about Elden Ring, it's topical, but just like Elden Ring in terms of there's stuff that they're like put so much effort into and thinking and mapping out, and you probably argue maybe 15% of people will see it. It's kind of like, I kind of love that. It's kind of sick, but there's something kind of beautiful about that in terms of like, they just respect the art, and that's what it's about. And they kind of don't give a fuck if people see it or not. They're like, we're going to put this masterpiece together and that's it, done. Like, it's up to you if you want to experience it all. So yeah, I love the whole branching endings and like I could tell like when I was playing through the game, because it was mostly blind when I was playing it. It was just like, oh man, I feel like I've gone down certain paths.
I know you shared a clip with us when you hit an unfortunate like battle cycle that you couldn't get out of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he doesn't have a certain party member. I'm like, that's interesting. That's interesting.
I'd say the way I play games, it's just like, it must be bad. Because like when I played Dark Souls, I was kind of like half blind, mostly blind. Like I was just trying to get through that game, right?
No.
And then like, I think, what's his name? Solaire, right?
Yeah.
Like he got fucked up like late in that game. I got him, I think I did most of the stuff I needed to do. And then I fucked something
it's
up.
It's so easy to screw that stuff up.
Okay. I do not blame you at all for Chrono Trigger because the situation we're talking about, which is big difference between the endings and stuff.
Yeah.
If you don't have if you don't know how to do it, you're probably going to miss it. So,
yeah. But it's still cool. I still liked it. That's the weird thing about it. Like I was like, because that's the beauty of like having multiple endings and you can stuff things up. That it feels more meaningful. Feels like, oh, okay, and it resolves as opposed to like not that I've played it, but Mass Effect trilogy. It's like, you stuff things up and then there's an ending that makes sense for the stuff ups and stuff like that. So
look, do we want to get into some of the things we probably not as big a fan of?
Yeah. Why don't we do that?
So and this does tie back to, I guess, one of the reasons why I wasn't so impressed with it back in the day was I wish this game had a main character. Like, you play as Chrono, but
sort of does, yeah.
he's basically your party at the start.
I think the frog's the main
guy.
Guy.
Chrono is basically a piece of wood in this game. And and it's by design, of course, but it does. I was so used to at that time. Again, I'd only played a few, but like having these main heroes that was just really interesting, and Chrono is just like nothing. And I don't know if it would make the game better to do that, but it's one of the things I didn't like personally.
Fair point.
And the story itself, so Mike, you're mentioning this, that's why I wanted to kind of stop you because I knew we'd bring it up now, is The
all about
story
him.
itself is a little average for me. I feel it
Oh,
does. There's
okay.
certain points where it is interesting, and there are some like twists and turns that I quite like, especially later in the game. But it's not the most compelling story for me.
Yeah,
So
same.
that's one. I think again one of the reasons why back then I'm like, it just didn't feel like the most legendary game ever that people hyped it up. But everything else now I appreciate so much more. Whereas the story, I still feel just doesn't hit for me. Like there's big stakes, but there's also times when I'm like, it just feels like the characters are doing something that and they're wasting time, you know. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Like maybe you guys didn't feel the same, but
No, I kind of felt, yeah.
I like before I go back to you, Mike. Like for me, it's so hard to extricate the story and the branching parts and
yeah,
the endings, and like to me, it's all like kind of one in the same. So I'll probably rate it a bit higher. But I mean, like also the other thing is, I'm not a story person in games. So to me, it's just
Yeah, we know
like,
that.
this is just dopey shit, right? Like this is like dumb, like stuff, and I like go along with it. I'm like, but it's super tropey. This game's super like I don't know. I think a lot of these games are super tropey.
oh yeah.
So
But this is
Yeah,
also they also specifically wanted to inject a lot of Akira Toriyama's humor into this game, so that's why this is very. There's elements that are very much like Goku, Piccolo
yeah.
joking kind of stuff,
But I did feel the frog was the main character, which was kind of weird because it was kind of like I don't know, in my playthrough at least, almost the least impactful of the characters you play. But it did feel like from archetypal perspective, it was the main character. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I totally agree with the point on the Chrono
Marl
Trigger
was.
thing. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know if there really was one. I mean, yeah, it was supposed to be Chrono, but being
Well,
the
it
silent
definitely is.
protagonist
Just,
that he is,
yeah, it's a silent
it's
protagonist,
just
right?
like you said, he's a piece of wood.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a couple of other things for me. You guys obviously might not feel the same, but while the not having random battles is great, as you went further into the game, it basically almost was like you knew when the battles were coming, but they're unavoidable. You literally couldn't avoid them, and it made backtracking through some areas are just annoying,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
weak enemies. Where you're like, okay, I'm gonna have to fight these
Yeah.
five
That
enemies
happened to
in
me a few
row.
times.
There
Yeah,
was just literally
Yeah,
no
I put
way
my
to really,
game on 4 speed or 16 speed
yeah,
or something.
to just avoid those encounters.
yeah.
Sometimes on the overall map, I love the design, but sometimes it's hard to tell what you can enter and what you can't. You've got to like keep
Yeah.
moving until you know what they are. Like you're moving around trying to find a name to pop up. Small gripe, but it is again like this is a game where the positives do outweigh the negatives, and I guess that leads into probably the last thing that I felt, and this is a common thing amongst classic RPGs, but there are times when it's not exactly clear what you're meant
Oh
to do,
yeah,
where you're meant to
100%.
go. And if you're not following a
Yes.
walkthrough, and I did have to look some stuff up again, even though I played this 20 years ago,
Did I?
it's very much sometimes you're like, oh, do I have to go back to the castle? And then I have to fight these 5 battles on the way there, 5 battles on the way
Yeah,
back.
like
'Cause
the
I've
bloody
done-
soup part.
yeah, it is but that's a common issue that's shared amongst these games, but it is still to me a bit of a smudge on this game. But look, if that's all I have to dislike about this game, then
Why can't it be
it's
more
a
like
very good
Elden
shame.
Ring, where you know exactly where you need to go next?
Yeah, you get to the ending and beat it. You're like, oh shit, I'm at the ending. Yeah, I never felt like that with like a Zelda, right? And I know like Zelda's not an RPG, obviously. I don't know. I keep bringing this bloody game up, but I mean, these games are compared to against each other. I didn't feel like that with Final Fantasy VI. Like, I never felt really like so stuck in that game. And I'm not that good at these games. Wow, frig, this game, there's no way I would have beaten this game if it did come out in Australia. Lucky it didn't, because I got stuck multiple times, and that's like when I had to look up, like, how do I get through this? Like, what the hell? Where? Because it's also got the other dimension of like, you could be going back in different time periods. So I'm like,
Yeah.
fuck, am I supposed to go here or there? And
And
I
you
just go
don't
around in
have-
circles for a bit.
And you don't have easy access to that all the time.
No,
So sometimes you might have
no.
to go through a whole area just to get back into the portal to then
Yeah.
travel to
Those
another area
random
that way.
battles, yeah.
So you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to bother doing that until I've explored everything. So you spend ages walking around that area and then like, well, I have to go do it. And then, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You know what happened to me? I was jumping for joy and then I got stuck because I'm so fat.
I'm like, I literally am fucking like, don't understand that joke.
You know,
I don't know what
You're
is
still not
happening.
understanding. I don't know. This sounds like.
Never mind.
Can you press that? Can you press that
It's a your
magic?
mum joke.
Can you press that magic button that turns it into a two-man show?
I could. I've thought about
It'll
doing
probably
it.
screw things up.
Yeah,
but that's all right,
it could
that's all
screw
right.
things up.
Okay,
I almost did it
okay, all right.
before when he did his
It's
when
a
I
your
said cool
mum
story,
joke.
bro. When I said cool story, bro. I was
Your
like,
mum is
I
so
was gonna
fat
just
that
go
when
see
she
her.
jumped for
All
joy,
right,
she
all
got
right.
stuck.
Okay, yeah, okay.
That's
Is
the
there-
joke.
When
Is
you
there
have to
anything
explain
else-
the joke,
I
you're
used it on myself.
listening.
Oh my god, because I'm
Is there
fat.
anything else you guys want to mention there, or do we want to wrap up?
Look, like, this is the game because this is the stuff I don't like. This is the game that made me realize I don't like JRPGs. Right? Because
Wow.
I've played a few JRPGs and I really enjoyed them. Like Final Fantasy VI, I love. It's like one of my favorite games. But I think that's Final Fantasy VI. Like the more JRPGs I play, I'm just like, I don't know if I like these games, man. Like I played a bunch of Final Fantasy VII and I'm like, I'm fucking hating this game. Like,
Damn.
I don't think it's a bad game. It just doesn't click with me. It's super mashed up styles. It's just like, it's just, I'm not
The
enjoying my time.
original 7?
Original.
Or the remake?
Original.
Yeah.
Original.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
one of my top 10 games.
Yeah, I'm
That's
like,
interesting how it's different, yeah.
I think this game is so well executed. It's like, I can't criticize it. It's like soundtrack, design, flow, story, optionality, everything like that, all coming out in 1995 on like 4 megabytes. And
Dude,
I was
4
just like,
megabytes, by the way, is 2 seconds worth of the stream.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, damn,
nuts.
this game has made me realize that I'm not an RPG guy. Like, I'm not a JRPG guy. So, yeah, I know that makes you sad, Swinny. I know that
was,
we're not going to be friends anymore.
Are you talking? Oh, so you're saying megabytes because it's a 32 megabit ROM card.
Well, it's not quite that. Yeah, the maths is a bit different, but it's a few seconds worth of the stream, really.
Yeah, is it a 32 megabit cartridge? or-
Megabit,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's 4 megabytes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, 4 times 8, right? Oh, wait, is that? Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I just because I read that before. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
12 seconds.
Look, I
13
think
seconds.
that's fair. Like, it's
Nuts.
RPGs are one of the most trope-ridden genres you can possibly get outside of maybe dating sims. And if that stuff,
Disco Elysium. It's probably the only
What
one.
is wrong with you?
What? I'm
Tonight's
just saying
episode?
it's not trope filled. If you want a non-trope filled RPG,
okay, no, let me clarify. JRPGs, I'm talking. about,
JRPG
yeah.
specifically,
Yeah.
No, you're
So,
right. Yeah.
so if that stuff grinds your gears, then that
Yeah.
genre is probably outside of maybe a couple of them. I'm probably never going to hit well with you, but it's interesting, and it's interesting when we come to talk about the last game that we have in our list, Earthbound. But
Have you played
just-
Earthbound at all, Mike?
No. Yes. Sorry. I was gonna say no, but then I remembered I played about 20 minutes, which doesn't
Yeah,
count.
okay, yeah.
So,
just
yeah.
the last. I just wanted to get the wrap up about Chrono
Yeah.
Trigger because, so as I said, it's like coming back to this game was probably one of the biggest eye openers for me because I'd always been what I'd consider a bit of a Chrono Trigger hater. Like in regards
Yeah.
to like everyone considers it one of the greatest games of all time.
Yeah,
and
totally do.
this coming in and replaying this has made my thoughts around the winner for Game of Some Other Year. I don't think we've even said Game of Some Other Year in this whole bloody segment.
Yeah.
Game of Some Other Year,
Oh.
1995. It's made that decision a lot harder for me, and
I like that.
that's why I'm really happy for this segment in that regard because
Yeah.
it made me kind of realize that I've got a new favorite SNES. Not favorite, but like a new favorite SNES
Whoa.
game. One of my to add to my favorites.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, like, I'll throw in a mic in a second, but I want to loop back to what I said in a weird way that playing this game now, because I didn't play it back in the day, playing it through, the two things I realized, I'm like, one, I'm not the biggest JRPG fan, definitely not. It's not my thing. But at the same time, totally can see how people consider this the best game ever. And I know that sounds totally contradictory, but as I said, if you're into that genre and that, floats your boat, it's like, what is it missing? To me, great characters,
Much, yeah.
great art, great music, good pacing, doesn't really get boring, lots of options, lots of stuff to do, replayability. So I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I never understood the whole Final Fantasy VI versus this game. I'm like, Final Fantasy VI destroys this game, but I didn't play it. And then having played it, I'm like, I personally prefer Final Fantasy VI, but I can see how people prefer this game. Like, and that's big for me because I love Final Fantasy VI. But Mike, what's your overall final
I-
thoughts on this game?
I really enjoyed it. What do you think, Spludge? You were sitting there watching me play it most of the time. I'm just gonna
I
bring
think we
my
need a
cat-
health check on
cat
Mike.
into the
Like,
picture.
has he had a stroke or
I think
something?
that week off, he must have been doing some.
Yeah, some.
There's a
I've had a stroke,
subreddit. There's a subreddit called "Took Too Much." I think
Yeah, it
Mike's
took too
been,
much.
featured on there.
He's still flying
Took too much cat.
a week later.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I for what it is. Again, I'm not a huge JRPG player either, but for what it is, I actually really enjoyed the game. Spoken about the pros and cons, of course. So the story didn't drive me as much as I had hoped, but then the concepts behind it and the battle system and the time travel bit captured me enough and captivated me enough to continue playing it. So I really liked it. Yeah.
Can I just say, it's so hard to take you seriously when you're sitting
Why?
there stroking your pussy. It's just like so ridiculous. All right. So yes, we've got one more game in 1995, game of some other year, which is Earthbound.
I don't think we'll be covering that next week. Just a heads up to everyone.
No.
Probably not.
I
Mike
will-
is not going to finish
I
it
will
by then.
probably finish it this week if I can, but I mean, I was pretty far in, so yeah,
I'm struggling, man, because I'm like about about 15 hours in, I think. And I'm like honestly going, I might switch to playing it on the Switch now, which is going to put me all the way back to the start. I don't
what I'm
know.
gonna do,
It's
though.
tough, man. It's really, I find the game very hard to sit down and play in front of the TV because that's how I'm playing it because it's on the Super NT.
I'm playing it on the SNES Classic, the mini console, which has been great.
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Like, so I'm playing in a similar way, just like, I guess, through almost the original means, but I just find it really hard to fit it in, like the way the game works and everything like that. Like, it's not a pick up and go kind of game. So, whereas that's why it's so good on the Switch for me personally, that I'm almost like, fuck, will I go back to square one? Maybe I will. Which is kind of
just
annoying. But
a warning for Mike that it's the game doesn't show its hands very early. It actually takes a while for the stuff to really to even get party
damn, okay.
members and stuff. So
I honestly think, Mike, I like, you know how I was saying I don't think you'll play like Andromeda and shit like that. I feel like the chance of you beating this game, quite honestly, is very
Okay, we'll
low.
see. We'll see.
Very fucking low.
We'll see.
Like, I honestly think I might have to concede defeat on this game at some point. Like, and I'm very stubborn with this shit. So, all right, well, that wraps us up for Chrono Trigger. Excellent game.